Jackson followed his gaze, a flicker of pride crossing his otherwise guarded expression. Former Special Forces, he explained, leaning back slightly. Chun runs tactical operations and intelligence. Rivera handles security protocols. They're not just escorts, they're the only ones I trust with what we're about to uncover. His words carried weight, hinting at the scale of the battle ahead, not just for Thornfield Orchard but for all of Golden Valley. Harold's eyes lingered on the tablet screens, their cryptic maps and data points, a language he couldn't read, yet he felt the gravity of his brother's world pressing against his own. The cabin's quiet hum contrasted with the roar of memory, decades of dawn-to-dusk labor, the scent of apple blossoms, Margaret's laughter fading into hospital beeps. Now here he was, aloft in a machine that cost more than his entire orchard, beside a brother who'd become a stranger, yet whose return had just saved their family's legacy. Below, the orchard came into view, its 215 acres a mix of resilient beauty and painful neglect. Rows of apple trees, some gnarled by blight, others sagging under outdated irrigation. Harold's throat tightened. He'd fought so hard, but the land bore the scars of his losses. Jackson's voice softened almost imperceptibly. It's still there, Harry. We'll bring it back. For the first time since the auction, Harold met his brother's eyes, seeing not just the corporate titan but the boy who'd once shared his dreams under those same trees, and he wondered if this flight might carry them toward reconciliation as much as retribution. Former Special Forces, Jackson said. Chin handles intelligence, Rivera security. They're trusted with what we're uncovering. Harold leaned forward. Which is what? You dropped $10 million, brought an Air Force, and threatened federal investigations. Jackson activated a tablet, a holographic map of Golden Valley glowing red with targeted properties. Clearwater's not random. They're after the aquifer system beneath, largest freshwater reserve in the Northeast, hidden until a DoD survey 3 months ago. Harold's eyes widened. They're buying farms for water rights. Jackson nodded. Meridian Resource Holdings, Clearwater's parent, controls water for profit. In 15 years, it's worth $300 billion. The lead Thornfield Aerospace helicopter sliced through the late September sky, its advanced noise-dampening technology rendering the powerful machine eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the mechanical groans of Harold Thornfield's ancient tractor. Inside the luxurious cabin, polished leather seats and sleek carbon fiber panels gleamed under soft LED lighting, a world so alien to Harold that he sat stiffly, his calloused hands resting awkwardly on the armrests, as if afraid to smudge the pristine surfaces. Across from him, Jackson Thornfield, now a billionaire defense contractor, sat with the relaxed poise of a man accustomed to commanding such spaces, his tailored suit unrumpled despite the day's chaos. Outside, the reinforced windows framed Golden Valley's sprawling landscape below, a patchwork of orchards, fields, and winding country roads, their familiar patterns marred by encroaching luxury developments and the scars of a decade of predatory foreclosures. The sight twisted Harold's gut. This was his home, his heritage, under siege by forces he'd barely understood until today. Jackson studied his older brother with a measured gaze, noting the lines etched deeper into Harold's weathered face since their last meeting 35 years ago when a teenage Jackson had stormed away from Thornfield after a bitter fight with their father. Still not a fan of flying? Jackson asked, his voice low but carrying a faint trace of their shared past, a hint of the boy who once raced Harold through Apple Rose. Harold grunted, shifting uncomfortably, the memory of his 2 prior flights, both tied to his late wife, Margaret, stirring a dull ache in his chest. Flew twice, Margaret's specialist in Boston, her funeral. Not much chance to get used to it, he said, his tone gruff but tinged with vulnerability, the words pulling up images of hospital corridors and a quiet graveside under Thornfield's oldest apple tree. He glanced toward Commander Chin and Major Rivera, seated at the cabin's rear, their faces illuminated by the glow of secure tablets as they monitored data streams with unrelenting focus. Chen's fingers danced across her screen, coordinating with the other helicopters, while Rivera's sharp eyes flicked between his device and the horizon as if anticipating threats even at 3,000 feet. Your escort's always this intense? Harold asked, nodding toward them, his farmer's pragmatism sizing up these strangers who moved with the precision of soldiers, not farm hands. Victor Harrington, sensing the shift in attention, stepped forward, his polished loafers silent on the polished oak floor. His smile was forced, a practiced mask that failed to reach his calculating blue eyes, which darted between the brothers like a hawk assessing prey. "Mr. Thornfield," he said, extending a manicured hand, his tone dripping with corporate charm, "a pleasure to finally meet you. Clearwater Development has long admired Thornfield Aerospace's remarkable success." The compliment hung in the air, hollow as the crystal flutes scattered on nearby tables, and the room seemed to hold its breath, sensing a confrontation brewing beneath the pleasantries. Jackson's gaze turned icy, his posture rigid as he ignored the outstretched hand, letting it linger awkwardly before Harrington withdrew it. "I'm familiar with your lending practices, Mr. Harrington," Jackson said, his voice cutting like a blade through the ballroom's perfumed haze. "My team has documented fascinating patterns. Predatory loans, manipulated water rights, and a trail of foreclosed farms that align a little too neatly with certain geological surveys." The accusation landed with precision, and Harrington's smile twitched, a crack in his facade revealing a flicker of unease. Around them, bidders shifted in their velvet chairs, their whispers rising like a tide, while Harold stood frozen, caught between the brother he'd lost and the enemy who'd nearly destroyed him. The weight of 35 years of secrets beginning to unravel in the opulent heart of Clearwater Estate. Harrington's smile faltered. "I'd love to discuss," Jackson cut him off. "We'll meet with the Federal Banking Commission, Department of Agriculture, and FBI's Financial Crimes Unit." Harrington paled. Jackson turned to his aide, Commander Chin. "Inform Squadron 2, accelerate Clearwater documentation. Contact General Marshall." To another, Major Rivera, process the orchard transfer to the Thornfield Family Trust. Harold watched, dazed. "Jack, what's happening?" Jackson softened. "It's about setting things right, Harry. Come with me to Thornfield." Jackson Thornfield strode through the parted crowd, his tailored charcoal suit cutting a sharp silhouette against the ballroom's ivory walls, each step measured yet commanding, as if he owned the very air around him. He stopped a few feet from Harold, close enough for the older brother to catch the faint scent of cedarwood cologne, a stark contrast to the orchard dust that clung to his own worn overalls. Up close, Jackson's polished exterior, crisp white shirt, cufflinks glinting like distant stars, stood in jarring opposition to the memory Harold held of a lanky teenager with unruly curls, grease-stained hands, and a defiant grin. Those curls were tamed now, disciplined by an expensive cut, but a single lock fell just slightly askew, a whisper of the boy who'd once raced Harold through Apple Rose. "Hello, Harry," Jackson said, his voice low and resonant, carrying the weight of 35 years apart, yet softened by a trace of something familiar, almost tender. Harold's throat tightened, his voice catching on the name he hadn't spoken in decades. "Jack," he managed, the word heavy with disbelief and buried pain. "You bought the orchard." His eyes searched his brother's face, seeking the sibling who'd left after a shouting match that had shattered their family, now replaced by the stranger whose $10 million bid had just appended the auction. Jackson's steel-gray eyes flickered with an unreadable emotion, regret, resolve, or perhaps a wound too old to name, before he spoke again. "There's a lot you don't know, Harry. About why I left, about Clearwater schemes, about what I uncovered 3 months ago in a classified survey that brought me back." His words were cryptic, laced with a quiet intensity that hinted at secrets too vast for this gilded room. The murmur of the crowd, still reeling from the $10 million bid, faded as Harold's world narrowed to this moment, the brother he'd thought lost forever now standing before him, wielding power he could scarcely comprehend. Harrington's jaw tightened, his gaze locked on Jackson, who stood unflinching, his aides flanking him like sentinels, their tablets glowing with data that hinted at preparations far beyond this moment. "10 million, sold," Barrett declared, his gavel falling with a sharp crack that echoed like a gunshot, sealing the fate of Thornfield Heritage Orchard and igniting a new chapter in a saga that had been dormant for 35 years. Harold's grip on the phone tightened, his pulse racing as he met Jackson's eyes across the room, searching for the boy he once knew in the stranger who had just saved their family's legacy or perhaps claimed it for reasons yet to be revealed. The ballroom erupted in a cascade of whispers, the murmurs swelling like a sudden gust through the opulent Clearwater estate where crystal chandeliers flickered with the weight of the moment. Jackson Thornfield, a man in a navy blazer, hissed, his voice sharp with recognition, leaning toward his companion, a woman whose diamond earrings caught the light as she nodded. Thornfield Aerospace, worth $40 billion, she whispered back, her tone a mix of awe and disbelief, as if a myth had stepped into their midst. The name rippled outward, igniting hushed conversations among the elite, their tailored suits and silk gowns rustling as they craned their necks to glimpse the figure in the doorway. Harold Thornfield froze, the satellite phone in his calloused hand suddenly heavy as a millstone, its sleek surface alien against his work-worn skin. Jackson. His younger brother, the gangly teenager who, 35 years ago, had stormed out of their family orchard after a bitter, door-slamming fight with their father, vowing never to return to the backward dirt patch that was Golden Valley. Harold's mind reeled, conjuring flashes of that night. Jackson's furious silhouette against the farmhouse porchlight, their father's unyielding scowl, and the silence that followed, stretching across decades. Now Jackson stood transformed, a billionaire defense contractor whose reclusiveness was legendary, his name whispered in Pentagon corridors and corporate boardrooms. A man who built drones that could outmaneuver storms and helicopters that rewrote modern warfare. Yet here he was, in a tailored charcoal suit that seemed to absorb the room's light, his presence commanding as he declared a $10 million bid that dwarfed all others. Harold's chest tightened, torn between disbelief and a flicker of hope, his weathered face betraying none of the storm within as he studied the brother he thought he'd lost forever. The crowd's whispers grew fevered, some bidders tapping furiously on their phones, likely searching for details on Thornfield Aerospace, while others exchanged knowing glances, sensing a seismic shift in the auction's power dynamics. Victor Harrington, CEO of Clearwater Development, sat rigid in his velvet chair, his silver hair immaculate but his eyes narrowed to slits, assessing Jackson with the cold calculation of a man unaccustomed to being outmaneuvered. His fingers twitched around his electronic paddle as if contemplating a counterbid, but the weight of Jackson's wealth and the unspoken threat in his arrival held him in check. Auctioneer William Barrett, momentarily thrown by the interruption, recovered with practiced professionalism, adjusting his gold-rimmed glasses as he cleared his throat. $10 million, he announced, his British accent steady despite the undercurrent of unease. Do I hear 10.5? The room fell silent, the air thick with anticipation, every bidder waiting for another to challenge the titan who had just redefined the game. No one moved. Thornfield Aerospace, the billionaire. Jackson Thornfield. Harold's breath caught, the satellite phone still clutched in his hand, his mind reeling to reconcile the brother who had stormed away from their family orchard 35 years ago with the titan now rewriting the auction's script. Victor Harrington, seated 3 rows ahead, turned slowly, his silver hair catching the light, his eyes narrowing with a mix of recognition and unease as he registered the new player in his carefully orchestrated game. $10 million for lot 29, Jackson repeated, his voice calm but unyielding, a promise and a challenge woven into the words as the helicopters outside slowed their rotors, their crews standing vigilant, ready for whatever came next. Through the towering east windows of the Clearwater Estate ballroom, a fleet of 6 sleek, black helicopters emerged from the golden September sky. Their synchronized descent a breathtaking spectacle of raw power and precision that seemed to defy the laws of gravity. The Thornfield Aerospace logos emblazoned on their sides caught the late afternoon sun, gleaming like polished obsidian, each emblem a silent declaration of a legacy the bidders had dismissed as quaint. The rhythmic thump of their rotors grew from a distant pulse to a deafening roar, shaking the crystal chandeliers overhead, their prismatic light fracturing into chaotic patterns across the ivory walls. Outside, the manicured lawn, previously a pristine canvas for the elite's luxury vehicles, became a stage for military efficiency as crews in crisp, navy blue uniforms disembarked with choreographed precision, their movements sharp and disciplined. securing the grounds as if claiming a battlefield. The auction froze mid-breath, the crowd's mocking laughter dying in their throats, replaced by a collective gasp as heads turned from the auctioneer's podium to the surreal scene unfolding beyond the glass. William Barrett's gavel hovered, forgotten, his practiced British cadence faltering as he struggled to process the intrusion of this unexpected force. Harold Thornfield, standing alone at the back, felt the weight of every scornful glance lift, replaced by a surge of something he hadn't felt since Margaret's death 5 years prior, hope, fragile but fierce. His weathered hand, still trembling from his futile $178,000 bid, reached into the pocket of his faded overalls and withdrew a satellite phone, its sleek design incongruous against his dirt-stained fingers. A relic of a promise made decades ago. He pressed a single button, the device humming to life, and raised it to his ear, his voice low but resolute as he spoke 2 words that carried the weight of 35 years. "I'm ready." The words hung in the air, a quiet detonation that shifted the room's gravity, drawing every eye to the farmer they had dismissed as a fool. Barrett, visibly flustered, stammered, "Ladies and gentlemen, please let us maintain order," but his plea was drowned by a commanding voice that sliced through the chaos from the ballroom's grand entrance. 10 million, it declared, each syllable ringing with unshakable authority. Jackson Thornfield stood framed in the doorway, his tailored charcoal suit accentuating a presence that seemed to command the very air around him, his broad shoulders and steely gaze a stark contrast to the lanky, grease-stained teenager Harold remembered from their youth. Flanked by 2 aides, Commander Chin, her sharp features focused on a secure tablet, and Major Rivera, clutching a briefcase with military rigidity, Jackson exuded the aura of a man who had reshaped industries and toppled empires. The crowd parted instinctively, their champagne flutes forgotten, as whispers rippled through the room. 3 million, he called, his paddle raised with casual dominance, a king claiming his prize. A hush blanketed the opulent ballroom, the bidders' eyes narrowing as they gauged Victor Harrington's bold $3 million play, his casual confidence radiating like a predator claiming its prize. Harold Thornfield, heart hammering against his ribs, seized the fleeting pause, stepping forward from the shadows of the back wall. $178,000, he declared, his voice steady despite the tremor in his calloused hands, which betrayed the weight of 5 generations resting on this moment. Heads swiveled, tailored suits and designer gowns rustling as amusement rippled through the crowd, their laughter sharp and biting, like shards of glass glinting under the chandeliers. Auctioneer William Barrett peered over his gold-rimmed glasses, his polished brow furrowing in confusion. "Sir, the current bid stands at 3 million. Are you offering $3,178,000? Harold's weathered fingers drew the crumpled envelope from his overalls, its edges worn from countless anxious grips, and he held it aloft as if it could shield his family's legacy. "No, sir, $178,000 cash. It's all I have," he said, his words carrying a quiet defiance that silenced the room for a heartbeat, though the smirks of the elite lingered, their disdain as palpable as the scent of their expensive perfumes. Behind him, a woman in a silk shawl whispered loudly, "He's delusional," her companion chuckling, unaware that the air was about to shift with the thunder of approaching rotors. Laughter erupted, sharp and mocking. Harrington turned, his gaze cold, not amused. Barrett tapped his gavel. "Sir, bids must exceed the current offer." Harold straightened undeterred. "I'm not bidding. I'm making a statement. That orchard's been Thornfield land for 5 generations. My great-grandfather brought saplings across the ocean. My grandfather grew it through the Depression. My father innovated when others failed. It's worth $3 million to you, but you've never seen an apple bud bloom. Look me in the eye. Know the man whose heritage you're buying." The room quieted, some shifting uncomfortably. Barrett cleared his throat. "Very moving, but we must—" Harold cut him off, eyes locked on Harrington. "I know what Clearwater did. Changed loan terms after my wife died. Denied restructuring, manipulated water rights, pressured assessors." Harrington's face darkened, signaling security. 2 guards approached, but then the floor trembled, chandeliers swaying. A rhythmic thump grew louder, undeniable. As the gavel rose to seal the fate of his family's 150-year orchard, Harold Thornfield faced a sea of smirks, then helicopters descended, and the brother he'd lost 35 years ago rewrote the rules. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if the story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The auctioneer's voice boomed through the opulent Clearwater Estate ballroom, each syllable polished by his crisp British accent. 3 million, going once. The words echoed off ivory walls adorned with modernist paintings, their abstract swirls mocking the man in worn overalls standing at the room's edge. Harold Thornfield, 72, gripped the crumpled envelope in his pocket, $178,000, his life savings and loans from loyal employees, a desperate bid to save Thornfield Heritage Orchard. The crowd's laughter still stung, their derision sharp after his audacious, inadequate offer. Men in tailored Italian suits and women in designer gowns sipped champagne, their crystal flutes catching the light of chandeliers. To them, Harold was a relic, a farmer out of place among Maseratis and Bentleys parked in the circular drive. The gavel hovered, poised to seal the orchard's fate, when a low tremor shook the room. Crystal tinkled overhead, and the rhythmic thunder of helicopter rotors drowned out the murmurs. Through the massive east windows, 6 sleek, black military-grade choppers descended onto the manicured lawn, their Thornfield Aerospace logos gleaming in the late September sun. Uniformed crews disembarked with precision, taking positions as if guarding a battlefield. All eyes turned to Harold, whose calloused hand now held a satellite phone. A thin smile crossed his weathered face as he spoke 2 words into the receiver: "I'm ready." The Clearwater Estate, a 19th-century mansion turned playground for the ultra-wealthy, stood on a bluff overlooking Lake Golden. Its marble steps and colonnaded entrance exuded timeless grandeur, but today it hosted a modern spectacle, the annual luxury property auction. German sports cars and chauffeur-driven SUVs lined the driveway, their polished surfaces reflecting the golden afternoon. Inside, the ballroom buzzed with anticipation. Bidders, armed with electronic paddles, eyed foreclosed estates, rare collectibles, and vintage wine collections, spoils of others' misfortunes. Harold Thornfield arrived in his rusted 1992 Ford pickup, its faded red paint and dented fender a jarring blemish amid the lot's gleaming Maseratis and Bentleys. The valet, a young man in a crisp black vest, froze, his eyes flicking from the truck's cracked windshield to Harold's weathered face. His disdain barely concealed as he took the keys with a grimace, as if handling something unclean. Harold's faded overalls, patched at the knees and flannel shirt, frayed at the cuffs, marked him as an outsider as he climbed the marble steps. His work boots leaving faint dust trails that seemed to offend the polished stone. He felt the weight of every glance, every whispered jab, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and polished leather. "Is that dirt under his nails?" A woman in a cream Chanel suit muttered, her voice cutting through the hum of wealth, loud enough for Harold to hear. Her companion, a silver-haired man with a silk pocket square, smirked, adjusting his cufflinks. Probably the gardener lost his way. Harold's jaw tightened, but he kept his gaze forward, the envelope in his pocket, $178,000, his life savings feeling heavier with each step. The murmurs followed him like a shadow, yet he straightened his shoulders, drawing strength from the memory of his great-grandfather's saplings planted in soil these people would never understand. To them, he was a curiosity, a fleeting amusement. To him, this was a battlefield, and he'd come to fight for Thornfield Orchard. Harold's face remained stoic, though his hands clenched briefly, betraying the storm within. He had anticipated this, braced for it, steeling himself against the sneers of the elite who saw him as a relic. The soil beneath his nails, ground into his skin from decades of toil, came from Thornfield Heritage Orchard, 215 acres his great-grandfather had planted in 1875 with saplings carried across the Atlantic in hope of a new life. Each tree, each furrow told a story of resilience. His grandfather's expansion during the Depression, defying hunger and despair to double the orchard's yield, his father's innovations in the 1960s, grafting new varieties that outshone competitors. To the bidders in their tailored suits, sipping champagne under chandeliers, it was merely development potential, a plot of land to be paved over for profit. To Harold, it was home, the heartbeat of 5 generations, where he'd proposed to Margaret under the oldest apple tree, where their laughter once mingled with the scent of blossoms. Every knot in those trees held a memory, every harvest a triumph over nature's whims. Losing it would be like losing his own blood, a betrayal of the ancestors whose sweat and dreams had carved this legacy from the earth. Yet here he stood, surrounded by those who'd never know the weight of such roots, their mockery a blade against his resolve. Inside, the ballroom dazzled, a cathedral of wealth where every detail screamed exclusivity. Crystal chandeliers, each a cascade of hand-cut prisms, cast kaleidoscopic light over rows of plush velvet chairs, their deep burgundy upholstery absorbing the murmurs of the elite. Bidders, their fingers dancing on sleek electronic devices, radiated confidence, their wealth a palpable force in the air. Harold declined a paddle at the entrance, his weathered hands tightening around the envelope in his pocket, knowing surprise was his only weapon in this arena of calculated power. He stood against the back wall, a solitary figure in faded overalls, ignoring the sidelong stares and whispered jibes that branded him an intruder. The polished oak paneling behind him reflected the room's glow, but not his resolve, as he steeled himself against the weight of their judgment. His envelope containing $178,000, every cent he'd scraped together, felt like a frail shield against the financial titans seated ahead. 3 rows forward sat Victor Harrington, CEO of Clearwater Development Corporation, his silver hair gleaming under the lights, his tailored charcoal suit exuding an authority that silenced lesser men. Beside him, Mayor Patricia Wilson of Golden Valley, her political smile as sharp as a blade, masked zoning changes that had paved the way for luxury estates over fertile fields. Their alliance, a quiet pact forged in backrooms, had crushed dozens of family farms across the county, including Harold's, turning generations of toil into footnotes in their ledgers. The auction began with smaller lots, vintage cars, including a gleaming 1962 Ferrari GTO that sparked a frenzy, impressionist paintings by Monet and Renoir, their colors vivid under the chandelier's glow, and diamond-encrusted watches that glittered like captured starlight. Millions changed hands with casual nods, bidders multitasking on phones, sealing deals or checking stock tickers, while others whispered over champagne, their laughter light as the bubbles in their crystal flutes. The air hummed with wealth, each lot a trophy of conquest, indifferent to the lives unraveled to provide them. Auctioneer William Barrett, resplendent in a tailored tuxedo, maintained a rhythmic cadence, his British accent weaving banter smooth as silk, coaxing higher bids with a knowing smile. A ripple of anticipation passed through the crowd as the digital screen flickered, signaling a shift to real estate. And now, Lot 29, Barrett announced, his voice rising with theatrical flourish, as aerial images of Thornfield Heritage Orchard flashed on the screen. Its orderly rows of apple trees a stark contrast to the room's decadence. A crown jewel. 215 acres of prime agricultural land, historical residence, outbuildings, and exceptional development potential due to recent zoning adjustments. Harold's heart pounded, a relentless drumbeat against his ribs as the digital screen flickered with images that pierced his soul. There was his white colonial farmhouse, its wide porch sagging but proud, where he and Margaret had rocked their infant daughter under summer stars. The red barn, rebuilt by his grandfather's calloused hands after World War II, stood weathered yet defiant, a sentinel of survival through lean years. The processing facility, his father's pride, modernized in the 1960s with borrowed money and boundless hope, now hummed only in memory. Every acre of Thornfield Heritage Orchard, 215 in all, bore the sweat of 5 generations, his great-grandfather's first apple saplings, planted with dreams carried across the ocean, his own decades of pruning under dawn's first light. Each tree held stories of harvests shared with neighbors, of Margaret's laughter during picking season, now silenced by her passing. Reduced to a line item on a cold auction block, the orchard was no longer a home, but a commodity labeled development potential. Starting bid, $1.2 million, Barrett declared, his voice slicing through Harold's reverie. Harold's $178,000, scraped together from his life savings and loans from loyal employees, felt like pocket change, a frail whisper against the roar of wealth in the room. Yet he clung to his promise to Margaret, made 5 years ago on her deathbed as she gripped his hand with fading strength. Fight for Thornfield until the end. Bidding erupted with the ferocity of a storm breaking. $1.2 million, called a man in a pinstripe suit, his voice clipped, eyes scanning the room for rivals. 1.3, countered a woman engrossed in her tablet, her manicured fingers tapping without pause. 1.5, another bidder shouted, barely glancing at the screen showing Thornfield Orchard's rolling hills. The price soared past $2 million, each bid a dagger to Harold's hope, twisting deeper with every call. These investors, cloaked in cologne and indifference, had never knelt in dew-soaked grass to prune a sapling or tasted the crisp bite of a fresh-picked apple. Their world was spreadsheets and profit margins, not the sweat-soaked nights Harold spent saving trees from frost. These investors, who'd never smelled apple blossoms or felt the weight of a harvest, saw only profit. Harold's chest tightened, his breath shallow, as the room's opulence seemed to close in, the chandelier's light mocking his faded flannel and work-worn hands. 9 years earlier, a blight had decimated 40% of his trees, leaving skeletal branches under a merciless sun. Then Margaret's cancer diagnosis brought crippling medical bills, each invoice a blow to their savings. Clearwater's predatory loans, terms shifting like quicksand, interest rates spiking without warning, pushed him to the brink. Their letters arrived like vultures circling, offering relief that only tightened the noose, engineered to ensure his failure. Now Harrington himself entered the fray. The lead Thornfield Aerospace helicopter, its sleek black frame slicing through the golden September sky, began its descent toward Thornfield Heritage Orchard, the 215-acre expanse that had been the heart of Harold Thornfield's life for 7 decades. From this unfamiliar aerial vantage, the orchard's neglect was laid bare, a stark contrast to the vibrant rows Harold once tended with pride. Diseased trees, their gnarled branches brittle and bare, stood like weary sentinels, victims of a blight that had struck 9 years prior and never fully healed. Outdated irrigation pipes, rusted and leaking, snaked haphazardly through the fields, their inefficiency a silent testament to years of financial strain. Idle equipment, tractors, harvesters, and sprayers sat abandoned in the yard, some draped in fraying tarps, their once shiny surfaces dulled by weather and time. Yet, beneath this decay, the orchard's bones endured, unyielding in their permanence. Ancient stone walls, hand-laid by Harold's great-grandfather in 1875, traced the property's boundaries with quiet dignity. The white colonial farmhouse, its paint peeling but its wide porch still inviting, stood resolute at the heart of the land. The red barn, expanded by his grandfather after surviving World War II, loomed as a monument to resilience. Harold, gazing through the helicopter's reinforced window, felt a pang in his chest, the sight stirring memories of spring mornings heavy with apple blossom scent and autumn harvests when the air buzzed with the hum of workers and the promise of abundance. Now the land seemed to mirror his own weathered frame, worn but not broken. Jackson Thornfield, seated across from his brother in the helicopter's luxurious cabin, studied the scene below with a strategist's eye, his tailored suit incongruous against the cracked leather of Harold's world. His voice, when he spoke, carried no accusation, only observation. You let it deteriorate. The words landed softly, but they cut deep, touching the raw wound of Harold's struggle to hold onto the orchard through a decade of unrelenting hardship. Harold's gaze remained fixed on the land, his weathered hands resting awkwardly on the plush armrests, as if unsure how to navigate this alien environment of wealth and power. Margaret's bills, the blight, Clearwater's loans, he replied, his voice low, each word heavy with the weight of choices made and battles lost. I ran on hope. He didn't elaborate, but the memories flooded back. Margaret's cancer diagnosis, the hospital visits that drained their savings, the blight that decimated 40% of their mature trees, and the predatory loans from Clearwater Development, with terms that shifted like sand underfoot, designed to ensure failure. Hope had been his only currency when banks turned him away and neighbors, one by one, lost their own farms to the same corporate machine. Jackson's expression flickered, something like regret, or perhaps recognition of the cost Harold had paid to keep their family's legacy alive, even if only in name. The helicopter settled onto the front field with practiced precision, its advanced noise-dampening technology making the landing eerily quiet, though the powerful downdraft sent clouds of dry dust swirling across the unmowed grass, a gritty haze that caught the late afternoon light. As the rotors slowed, Harold and Jackson disembarked, stepping onto Thornfield soil for the first time together in 35 years. The contrast between them was stark. Harold, in his faded overalls and scuffed work boots, seemed an extension of the land itself, every crease in his face etched by seasons of toil. Jackson, in his handcrafted suit and polished loafers, moved with the assured grace of a man who commanded boardrooms and battlefields alike. The air carried the faint, bittersweet scent of overripe apples left unharvested, mingling with the sharp tang of diesel from the idle machinery. Harold's boots crunched on the gravel path, a familiar sound that grounded him, while Jackson's steps were deliberate, as if relearning the rhythm of a place he'd sworn never to return to. To their surprise, a crowd awaited near the farmhouse, a cluster of familiar vehicles, pickup trucks, a battered sedan, a tractor parked haphazardly along the orchard's gravel driveway. Neighbors, farmers, and lifelong residents of Golden Valley stood in loose groups, their faces a mix of concern, curiosity, and cautious hope. Word of the dramatic auction at Clearwater Estate had spread like wildfire, carried by small-town networks that thrived on shared stories and mutual reliance. Frank Miller, the grizzled equipment repairman whose family shop had serviced Thornfield's tractors for 3 generations, stepped forward, his flannel shirt rolled up to reveal forearms scarred from years of wrench work. "Harold, we heard," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Jimmy's nephew works security at Clearwater. Called the minute he saw what happened." Frank's eyes, sharp despite his 68 years, widened as they landed on Jackson, recognition dawning like a slow sunrise. "Jack?" The name hung in the air, a bridge to a past when Jackson was just a lanky teenager with grease under his nails. Not the billionaire CEO whose helicopters had turned an auction into a spectacle. The crowd stirred, murmurs rippling as others connected the dots. Sarah Jenkins, the elementary school principal who'd taught both Thornfield boys, tilted her head, her glasses glinting as she studied Jackson's transformed presence. The Peterson brothers, whose dairy farm bordered Thornfield's northern edge, exchanged glances, their weathered faces reflecting disbelief that the prodigal son had returned in such dramatic fashion. Pastor Williams, his clerical collar slightly askew, clasped his hands, as if praying for clarity amid the unexpected reunion. Harold felt their gazes, a mixture of support for him and curiosity about his brother, and he sensed the unspoken questions. Why now? What did Jackson's return mean for Thornfield, for Golden Valley? The orchard, despite its decay, seemed to pulse with new possibility, its enduring structures a reminder that roots ran deeper than surface wounds. Jackson, for his part, stood slightly apart, his posture alert as if bracing for judgment from a community he'd left behind. Yet his eyes, scanning the familiar faces, held a flicker of something softer, perhaps a longing to reclaim what he'd lost, not just in land, but in belonging. To their surprise, a crowd awaited near the farmhouse, a cluster of familiar vehicles, pickup trucks, a battered sedan, a tractor parked haphazardly along the orchard's gravel driveway. Neighbors, farmers, and lifelong residents of Golden Valley stood in loose groups, their faces a mix of concern, curiosity, and cautious hope. Word of the dramatic auction at Clearwater Estate had spread like wildfire, carried by small-town networks that thrived on shared stories and mutual reliance. Frank Miller, the grizzled equipment repairman whose family shop had serviced Thornfield's tractors for 3 generations, stepped forward, his flannel shirt rolled up to reveal forearms scarred from years of wrench work. "Harold, we heard," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Jimmy's nephew works security at Clearwater. Called the minute he saw what happened." Frank's eyes, sharp despite his 68 years, widened as they landed on Jackson, recognition dawning like a slow sunrise. "Jack?" The name hung in the air, a bridge to a past when Jackson was just a lanky teenager with grease under his nails. Not the billionaire CEO whose helicopters had turned an auction into a spectacle. The crowd stirred, murmurs rippling as others connected the dots. Sarah Jenkins, the elementary school principal who taught both Thornfield boys, tilted her head, her glasses glinting as she studied Jackson's transformed presence. The Peterson brothers, whose dairy farm bordered Thornfield's northern edge, exchanged glances, their weathered faces reflecting disbelief that the prodigal son had returned in such dramatic fashion. Pastor Williams, his clerical collar slightly askew, clasped his hands, as if praying for clarity amid the unexpected reunion. Harold felt their gazes, a mixture of support for him and curiosity about his brother, and he sensed the unspoken questions. Why now? What did Jackson's return mean for Thornfield, for Golden Valley? The orchard, despite its decay, seemed to pulse with new possibility, its enduring structures a reminder that roots ran deeper than surface wounds. Jackson, for his part, stood slightly apart, his posture alert as if bracing for judgment from a community he'd left behind. Yet his eyes, scanning the familiar faces, held a flicker of something softer, perhaps a longing to reclaim what he'd lost, not just in land, but in belonging. Jackson nodded, his tailored suit an incongruous contrast to the dusty gravel drive where the neighbors stood, their weathered faces etched with concern and curiosity. "It's Jackson now," he said, his voice carrying the measured authority of a man who'd reshaped battlefields and boardrooms alike. "I reclaimed the orchard, secured it legally through the Thornfield Family Trust, untouchable by Clearwater's grasp." His words landed like a stone in still water, ripples of recognition spreading through the crowd. Frank Miller, the Peterson brothers, Sarah Jenkins, and others who'd known Jack Thornfield as a rebellious teen, not the billionaire defense contractor now before them. Harold, his work boots rooted to the earth that had sustained his family since 1875, addressed the group, his voice rough but warm, betraying the strain of the day's humiliations. "Thanks for coming, folks, truly. Your support means more than I can say, but Jackson and I need to talk, just the two of us." The neighbors nodded, some clasping Harold's shoulder, others casting wary glances at Jackson's security team, their sleek headsets and disciplined postures a stark reminder of the forces now at play. As the group dispersed, their trucks and sedans kicking up dust along the orchard's winding drive, Harold led Jackson toward the farmhouse, the weight of 35 years, silence pressing between them like an unyielding fog. Inside, the Thornfield farmhouse was a time capsule, its air thick with the scent of aged wood and faint traces of the apple cider Margaret used to simmer on autumn evenings. Family photos lined the hallway, their black and white frames capturing generations of Thornfields, stoic farmers, smiling children, weddings under the orchard's ancient trees. The massive oak dining table, scarred from decades of family meals, stood resolute in the center of the room while an ancient refrigerator hummed loudly in the kitchen corner, its chipped enamel a testament to stubborn endurance. Jackson moved slowly, his polished shoes clicking softly on the worn floorboards, and paused at a faded photograph on the wall. Two boys, gap-toothed and grinning, perched atop their father's tractor, the orchard stretching endlessly behind them. "You kept everything," he said, his voice quieter now, almost reverent, as if touching the edges of a life he'd abandoned. His fingers hovered over the frame, not quite making contact, as though afraid to disturb the memory. Harold, shrugging off his flannel jacket, moved to the kitchen, the familiar ritual of brewing coffee grounding him amidst the surreal reunion. Not by choice, he replied, his tone clipped but not bitter, as he filled the old percolator, the same one their mother had used, its dented steel a silent witness to countless mornings. The gurgle of boiling water filled the silence as Harold wrestled with the flood of emotions, relief at the orchard's salvation, confusion over Jackson's return, and a buried ache for the brother who'd vanished after their father's wrath. He set 2 chipped mugs on the table, the coffee's bitter aroma curling through the air, and sat across from Jackson, whose tailored suit looked absurdly out of place against the kitchen's humble backdrop. The billionaire's eyes, sharp and calculating, softened momentarily as he wrapped his hands around the mug, the warmth a fleeting bridge to their shared past. Over the steaming mugs, Jackson began to unravel the truth behind his departure. His voice steady but laced with a regret he couldn't fully mask. 35 years ago, I found loan documents in Dad's office, Valley Bank, predatory terms designed to choke us slowly. Then a letter from Richard Harrington, Victor's father, offering to buy water exploration rights beneath our land. Dad refused, called it a betrayal of everything Thornfield stood for. Jackson's gaze drifted to the window, where the orchard's struggling trees stood silhouetted against the fading light. When I pushed him to explain, he exploded. Said I was meddling, undermining him. 2 weeks later, we fought about MIT, my scholarship, my dream to study aerospace. He saw it as abandoning the family. That was the breaking point. I left, vowing never to return to a place that couldn't see the future. Harold, shrugging off his flannel jacket, moved to the kitchen, the familiar ritual of brewing coffee grounding him amidst the surreal reunion. Not by choice, he replied, his tone clipped but not bitter, as he filled the old percolator, the same one their mother had used, its dented steel a silent witness to countless mornings. The gurgle of boiling water filled the silence as Harold wrestled with the flood of emotions. Relief at the orchard's salvation, confusion over Jackson's return, and a buried ache for the brother who'd vanished after their father's wrath. He set 2 chipped mugs on the table, the coffee's bitter aroma curling through the air, and sat across from Jackson, whose tailored suit looked absurdly out of place against the kitchen's humble backdrop. The billionaire's eyes, sharp and calculating, softened momentarily as he wrapped his hands around the mug, the warmth a fleeting bridge to their shared past. Over the steaming mugs, Jackson began to unravel the truth behind his departure, his voice steady but laced with a regret he couldn't fully mask. 35 years ago, I found loan documents in Dad's office, Valley Bank, predatory terms designed to choke us slowly. Then a letter from Richard Harrington, Victor's father, offering to buy water exploration rights beneath our land. Dad refused, called it a betrayal of everything Thornfield stood for. Jackson's gaze drifted to the window where the orchard's struggling trees stood silhouetted against the fading light. When I pushed him to explain, he exploded. Said I was meddling, undermining him. 2 weeks later, we fought about MIT, my scholarship, my dream to study aerospace. He saw it as abandoning the family. That was the breaking point. I left, vowing never to return to a place that couldn't see the future. Harold stared at his brother, the pieces of a decades-long puzzle clicking into place, the predatory loans, the zoning changes, the foreclosures that had gutted their community. The orchard outside, its neglected rows a mirror of his own exhaustion, suddenly felt like more than a personal loss. It was a battleground in a war he hadn't known they were fighting. The coffee had grown cold, but the fire in Harold's chest burned hotter, fueled by the truth and the presence of the brother he'd thought lost forever. Outside, the evening deepened, the orchard's ancient trees standing sentinel, unaware that their fate and that of Golden Valley now rested on the fragile reunion unfolding within the farmhouse walls. A sharp, insistent knock sliced through the quiet of the Thornfield farmhouse, jolting the brothers from their coffee-laden conversation, the weight of 35 years of separation still heavy in the air. Harold set down his mug, its chipped ceramic clinking softly against the oak table, and exchanged a wary glance with Jackson, whose hand instinctively hovered near the sleek satellite phone on his belt. The knock came again, 3 precise raps, authoritative yet not hostile, echoing off the weathered wooden walls adorned with faded family photos. Harold rose, his work boots scuffing the worn floorboards, and opened the door to reveal Sheriff Diane Martinez standing on the wraparound porch, her department-issued hat clutched in one hand. Her dark eyes scanning the interior with the practiced vigilance of a woman who'd spent a decade keeping Golden Valley's peace. At 48, Martinez carried herself with unyielding fairness, her pressed khaki uniform and polished badge a stark contrast to the orchard dust swirling in the late afternoon light. Behind her, the distant hum of Jackson's helicopter fleet lingered, their rotors idling on the front field, a reminder of the morning's dramatic upheaval at Clearwater Estate. Mayor Wilson's hyperventilating in my office and Victor Harrington's burning up the phone lines to the governor, the state police, anyone who'll listen, Martinez said without preamble, her voice low but edged with steel, betraying her irritation at being pulled into this corporate circus. Care to explain why 6 military-grade helicopters just turned Clearwater's lawn into a landing strip? She stepped inside uninvited, her boots clicking on the hardwood, and fixed Jackson with a look that demanded answers, not excuses. Jackson, seated at the kitchen table in his tailored suit, remained unruffled, his billionaire composure a stark contrast to the humble setting. "Legal reclamation, Sheriff," he replied, his tone as smooth as the polished titanium of his aircraft, though his eyes held a glint of strategic calculation. "Thornfield Heritage Orchard is back in family hands, secured through a lawful purchase." Martinez's eyes narrowed, her law enforcement instincts catching the careful wording. She crossed her arms, the faint creak of her leather belt punctuating the silence. "And the FBI threats you were throwing around at the auction? That part of your legal reclamation too, or are we playing a bigger game here?" Her gaze flicked to Harold, who stood near the ancient refrigerator, its hum a familiar backdrop to the tension. Harold stepped forward, his weathered face etched with resolve, the same stubborn determination that had carried him through years of fighting Clearwater's predatory grip. "We have concerns about Clearwater Development's practices, Diane," he said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of personal loss, Margaret's death, the blight, the loans that bled him dry. Serious concerns backed by evidence. Martinez studied him, her expression softening slightly at the mention of Harold's struggles, a story she knew well from years of community coffee chats and county meetings. "Harrington looked like he'd seen a ghost when he called in his complaint," she said, her tone shifting from skepticism to curiosity. "If he's spooked, you've got something solid. What's the evidence?" She planted herself near the dining table, now a makeshift command center with Jackson's tablet and secure communication devices, her posture signaling she wasn't leaving without answers. Jackson hesitated, his fingers drumming lightly on the table, weighing the risks of revealing his hand to a local sheriff, even one as principled as Martinez. The kitchen clock ticked loudly, each second amplifying the stakes. Clearwater's influence ran deep, and premature leaks could unravel everything. But Martinez's reputation for integrity, earned through years of standing up to political pressures, tipped the scales. He leaned forward, activating his tablet, and a holographic timeline materialized above the table, its glowing lines mapping a decade of deceit. "Clearwater Development, a subsidiary of Meridian Resource Holdings, has systematically targeted Golden Valley farms," he began, his voice low but commanding, as if briefing a Pentagon war room. The display highlighted predatory loan agreements with escalating interest rates, foreclosures timed to exploit family crises, and properties acquired over key aquifer channels. "They're not after land for luxury estates. They're securing water rights to the largest freshwater aquifer in the Northeast, worth billions in a climate-changed future." Martinez leaned closer, her sharp eyes tracing the timeline's connections, suspicious zoning changes pushed by Mayor Wilson, payoffs to county commissioners, manipulated water rights assessments. Her jaw tightened as she recognized names, local officials she'd long suspected of bending to corporate interests. "This isn't just shady business," she said, her voice hardening with professional outrage, the kind reserved for betrayals of public trust. "This is corruption, plain and simple, orchestrated to rob families like yours of their heritage." She straightened, her hand resting near her radio, already calculating her next move. You're saying Harrington's been playing Golden Valley for a decade and no one connected the dots until now? Jackson's expression darkened, a flicker of personal guilt surfacing. I should have seen it sooner, but I was elsewhere. He glanced at Harold, the unspoken rift of 35 years hanging between them. 3 months ago, a Department of Defense contract gave me access to geological surveys that exposed the aquifer's value and Clearwater's strategy. Harold, standing silently, felt a surge of mixed emotions, gratitude for his brother's return, but also the sting of years lost to silence. Martinez nodded, her focus unwavering. If you're handing me evidence like this, I need everything, documents, financials, the works. And I need to know what you're planning because Harrington's not going to sit quietly while you dismantle his empire. Before Jackson could respond, a faint vibration stirred the air, the distant thrum of engines growing louder. Through the farmhouse's west window, they glimpsed Commander Chin, Jackson's tactical aide, signaling urgently from the porch. Mr. Thornfield, she called, her voice clipped. We've got 3 unmarked SUVs approaching from the county road. Meridian's asset protection team. The room tensed, Martinez's hand instinctively moving to her service weapon. Harold's heart sank, recognizing the escalation. Clearwater wasn't just spooked, they were retaliating. Jackson's calm facade remained, but his eyes burned with resolve. Defensive Protocol 4, Chin. No engagement unless provoked. To Martinez, he added, this is about to get complicated, Sheriff. Are you in? Martinez's lips pressed into a thin line, her decision made in the heartbeat it took to glance at Harold's weary but determined face. In my county, no one brings paramilitary muscle without answering to me, she said, her voice a quiet promise of accountability. Show me the rest of your evidence and let's end this. Outside, Chin reported 3 black SUVs approaching. Jackson ordered defensive protocols. Martinez bristled. Paramilitary in my county? Jackson confirmed, Meridian's asset protection team. The standoff began, deputies arriving to encircle Clearwater's forces. Martinez demanded evidence. Jackson transferred files, revealing 30 years of preparation. I became someone they couldn't ignore, he told Harold. At the courthouse, Harold mobilized 43 speakers to delay an emergency eminent domain vote. Jackson presented evidence, aquifer maps, Clearwater's pattern, Meridian's projections. FBI agent Diana Reeves arrived, confirming federal warrants. Harrington was escorted out in handcuffs, his empire crumbling. 3 months later, Thornfield Orchard thrived. New saplings grew, irrigation hummed, locals worked alongside Jackson's tech. The farmhouse blended history and innovation. Over coffee, Jackson shared news, aquifer protection laws passed, new commissioners elected, Harrington indicted. Harold asked, You're not leaving, are you? Jackson eyed the orchard. Peterson Properties ideal for a regional office. Harold nodded. Needs irrigation work. They smiled, brothers again. Martinez arrived with property restoration filings. 17 farms would return to owners, backed by the Thornfield Foundation. On the porch, they watched the orchard glow. Dad would have hated and loved this, Harold said. Jackson agreed. He adapted when it mattered. Martinez grinned. Stubbornness and adaptation, Thornfield traits. As stars emerged, Thornfield Orchard stood reborn, a testament to heritage, resilience, and 2 brothers who, after 35 years, fought as one. Harold placed 2 mugs of cider on the porch rail, the chipped one, its faded violets barely visible under hairline cracks, still smelling faintly of Margaret's lavender hand cream, and the stainless steel tumbler, sleek and impersonal, a relic from Jackson's corporate world. The camera drifted across the orchard, lingering on the gnarled apple tree where he'd knelt decades ago, a trembling ring in his hand and hope thick in his throat. Now, its bark bore a solar-powered sensor node, its blue LED blinking in harmony with the irrigation system humming beneath the soil, a marriage of tradition and technology Margaret would have teased him for resisting. Jackson's scarred hand entered the frame, calluses from decades of aerospace engineering barely hidden under his tailored cuff, pressing a Polaroid against the tree's weathered trunk. The photo, creased and sun-bleached, showed two boys straddling their father's tractor, Harold's arms slung protectively around a scowling 12-year-old Jack. "She'd be proud," Jackson said, his voice roughened by years of silence and regret, yet softened by the cider's warmth. Harold's throat tightened as the wind stirred the leaves, carrying the faintest trace of Margaret's perfume, or maybe just apple blossoms and memory. A single tear traced Harold's weathered cheek, catching the sunset's glow like liquid amber before vanishing into the earth where Margaret's laughter once took root. The screen faded to credits, lingering on the sensor's pulse and the distant whir of drones patrolling the aquifer, guardians of a legacy reborn. Beyond the fence line, a sapling grafted from the ancient tree stretched toward the twilight, its young branches already heavy with the promise of first blossoms.